Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops, Thompson-Nicola, and this is certainly no exception. C12, what originally was conceived of as C2, well, it was Mr. Speaker, now Madam Speaker, welcome to the chair, really has had a very long journey. Let's be real here. We've been here since, well, the election was in April, we came here in May, and C2 was really the first substantial bill. I hadn't really dealt with a lot of omnibus bills, and I still remember when the Liberals came to power, they talked about the effect of omnibus bills on democracy. And they talked about using parliamentary tricks and omnibus bills and time allocation and things like that, and how they would never, ever do that. And we now see that the Liberals, I think, to be very candid, actually put way too much in one bill. They may have, so to speak, bit off more than they could chew. When you put lawful access, for instance, in parts 14 and 15 into a bill that touches on the sex offense registry, putting the Coast Guard under the authority of the Minister of National Defense, talks about cash transactions over $10,000, requires mandatory reporting from all sorts of financial agencies, and has dramatic immigration reforms, you are going to end up with a bill that is a hodgepodge of policies. And lo and behold, we've dealt with a bill that was largely unworkable at the end of the day. And we know it was unworkable because this bill was originally tabled in the form of Bill C2. Now it's C12. Now, the Liberals can claim that this was a good thing, but the reality is that they had to, word for word, take various parts, Madam Speaker, of Bill C2 and hive them off into another bill. In fact, I was at the Public Safety Committee not long ago, and we had a legal expert, somebody that was an expert in, I believe it was constitutional law, and she was asked about lawful access. Now, lawful access is something that lawyers debate about. It's not an easy topic to comprehend. I wouldn't disregard anybody if they said, in this House, if they said, look, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around lawful access. And what she said, Madam Speaker, is lawful access requires its own bill. And yet, we had a bill that that essentially was forced on us. The Liberals to this day are attempting to shame us into passing a bill on lawful access that throws everything and the kitchen sink into a bill and expects us to produce a shining, gleaming bill when I believe it was the Privacy Commissioner, Madam Speaker, wasn't even asked for input. Now, for those at home who are watching, they don't know, lawful access talks about what the government can do without a warrant. Sounds good, right? In my prior career, warrants or judicial authorizations, they can come in many forms. A warrant is one of them. When a person has an expectation of privacy and a search isn't prescribed by law, as in there's no law saying you may search this, then you need a warrant. Search warrants are the most common ones, but other authorizations might include a production order, things like that. The Liberals, who roundly mocked the Harper government when the Harper government introduced lawful access. You are going far too far, they said, Madam Speaker, to the Harper government. And yet, what do? They bury lawful access, a critical legal element in this bill, Bill C2, and then expect that everybody will turn a blind eye to what at least maybe, but are potentially likely breaches of Section 8 of the Charter, which says Canadians have a right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. So the Liberals love to wield the Charter, Madam Speaker, when it suits their purposes. Yeah. However, when it doesn't suit their purposes, They say, oh, well, that's okay, because this is charter compliant, as though we're supposed to take their word for it. We've seen where it goes when we're supposed to take the Liberals' word for it. In fact, we just had the Justice Minister table Bill C-16 yesterday. And I can tell you, Madam Speaker, I cannot say how many times in committee I brought up the issue of mandatory minimum jail sentences and was laughed at, was mocked by people like Minister Labetti, Minister Varani. Minister Varani and I had a good relationship, but he would literally defend the lack of mandatory minimums. No, we don't want to tie the hands of judges, they would say. In fact, Madam Speaker, just the other day, my colleague from Lethbridge was giving an impassioned speech, and I could not believe what I heard for the Parliamentary Secretary to Justice. This was about making sex offense sentencing consecutive. I mean, who is against that, right? Apparently the Liberals are against that. She talked about the unconstitutionality. You can't make this up, Madam Speaker. That wouldn't be constitutional, she said. What? Even though there's an analogous provision for sex offenses against kids, but we don't want to talk about that. See, this is the cherry picking of the charter that we often see, Madam Speaker. We don't want to do that. And you know what the cherry on top was, Madam Speaker? We don't want to tie the hands of judges. Well, we do that all the time, Madam Speaker. We do it all the time. In fact, we do it in bills that say you must get a warrant, or the parameters of what a warrant can be. In one case, we were tying the hands of peace officers. In the other case, we're telling judges what they can and cannot do. A murder conviction, for instance, has a mandatory life sentence. Oh, we're okay with tying judges' hands there. What about house arrest? What about house arrest for sex offenses? For years, they told us that was not the case, that was okay. I brought this up to many ministers at committee, and we were told, no, we will not tie the hands of judges. And yet, just yesterday, C-16 comes out, and look, the Liberals say we should be giving them high fives. We should be patting them on the backs because they finally listened to the Conservatives. So on one hand, yeah, we don't want to tie the hands of judges. On the other hand, they are expecting people to praise them for doing that very thing. This is just unbelievable, Madam Speaker. You have a colossal failure that was Bill C-2. It has gone so far in the form of C-12. And I'll be candid with you. When C-12 came to the SECU, to the Public Safety, colloquially the Public Safety Committee, there weren't a lot of amendments because the controversial stuff, the stuff like Canada Post being able to open your mail, which I'll note the member for Winnipeg North still can't wrap his head around, even though it's plain as day. And his own official said, yes, you can open mail without a warrant. I guess the fact that justice officials said you can open mail without a warrant according to C2 wasn't good enough for the member for Winnipeg North. He just wanted to repeatedly say, Frank, you need a warrant, even though you don't. Not that I'm counting or anything, Madam Speaker. Be that as it may, Madam Speaker, there are a lot of amendments, and there's been a lot of hard work that's gone into this. I recognize the member from Calgary Nose Hill on her exceptional work when it comes to immigration. I believe that I was at the table when I believe something like 48 amendments were moved, a number along those lines. And I was actually quite surprised because in some cases, the Bloc voted with the Conservatives on these things. Like common sense, when you lie about your application, when you commit fraud to get into Canada, you should not then be able to resile from that fraud and still expect the same treatment as somebody who did not commit fraud. And I'm saying this as a child of immigrants. I owe everything in my life to immigration. The night of my election, my mom said to me, my first election, she said, can you imagine what your nonno Pasquale, my grandfather, his name was Pasquale, would say if he was observing this? He had to borrow money to buy a chicken on Christmas Day when he first got to Canada. So when we think about these things, Madam Speaker, nobody here on this side of the House is opposed to immigration.
That's right.
Nobody is the member for Winnipeg is actually saying, well, and doing this.
Yeah,
you know what? Do you know what? It's true, he says, Madam Speaker. The audacity to say that when we have members on this bench who immigrated to Canada. When we have members, no, that member can be quiet, Madam Speaker. I'm making a point.
Could we listen to the honourable member's speech? Thank you.
That member can be quiet. We can joke around about different things, but when that member says that we're on immigration, when our front bench has people who came to Canada for a better life, when our front bench has people that I would get behind and who would get behind me, who fight for families like Bailey McCourt's.
That's right.
And to say that we're on immigration. My family didn't have 2 pennies to rub together, and I am darn proud of my immigration legacy, and I'm proud of the legacy of every member in this House, whether they were born here or they came here for a better life.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, that'd be for another day in regards to, I don't believe 100% of the Conservative caucus and the type of stuff that they put on social media is what I would classify as immigrant friendly. Let's just leave it at that. The issue that we have before us today is a substantive piece of legislation that's going to make our communities and our country safer. And we have had, through this government, a number of pieces of legislation, some of which the member has actually brought forward. And part of the frustration that the government has experienced is the way in which the Conservative Party, as an opposition party, is preventing, in many ways filibustering, legislation to ultimately pass so that we can provide things such as bail reform legislation. And the question I would ask the member is, would he feel any sorts of obligation to actually see some of the legislation pass that likely won't because of filibustering?
The Honourable Member for Kamloops Thompson Nicola.
Can someone tell me, Madam Speaker, is the filibuster that the Liberals were doing at Transport Committee, is that still going on? Oh, wait a minute. So when the Liberals filibuster, A-OK, Madam Speaker. But when the Liberals can't get their house in order, when they can't figure out how to pass their own legislation. They sat on bail legislation for 10 years. They told us there was no problem. And then they have the audacity, after mocking our party on immigration, to waltz in here and say, you won't pass bail legislation after they told us for 10 years there was no problem. And now they're saying turn on a dime and do it when they can't figure it out for themselves. That is their fault, their problem. They sat on their hands. Now they have to navigate it through. Madam Speaker, I really wish we could have heard from the member for Vancouver, but hopefully we'll have more time for that, Madam Speaker, because I don't think he would be mocking us on our immigration policies.
L'honorable député de Jonquière.
The honourable member for Jonquière. Thank you, Madam Speaker. As my colleague said, there was some great cooperative work on committee on C-12 on some of the amendments. The government decided not to take us up on those, which is unfortunate. But one good thing about the bill is that the government recognizes explicitly now that there was a problem with asylum seekers. For a long time, all Quebecers were blamed for not being very welcoming of these huge numbers of asylum seekers. And the government has now recognized, in a way, the Liberal government has recognized that they neglected the problem that Quebec was grappling with asylum seekers. So I'd like to hear from my colleague on that.
Thompson Nicola.
I would like to say, through you, Madam Speaker, thank you for the question.
My bloc colleague. Madam Speaker, when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers, I don't think anybody in this House says there's a problem with people coming from another country who are fleeing persecution. Some of the greatest Canadians I know fled persecution. I have somebody with redistribution. He's no longer in my riding. He fled Afghanistan with a backpack. I believe he actually watched a family member be killed. I don't take issue with that person. In fact, he has come here for a better life, fleeing persecution. So I want to be very clear when I talk about the Conservative standpoint. When we say refugees under international law and asylum seekers after international law, with international law, we must be welcoming to those people. And I could talk about this for hours. I could probably have a long conversation about that. The immigration portion that I'm sure my colleague from Calgary Nose Hill is going to talk about the issues that sometimes we have there. But legitimate people arriving as asylum seekers, legitimate people who are legitimately seeking to arrive as refugees, in my view, and on behalf of the Conservative Party, there is absolutely no issue with legitimacy in immigration in those regards. Thank you.